When I ran from the group home, an abandoned barn became my shelter. What I found inside was worth millions. And if you've ever felt like you were running with nowhere to go, if you've ever had to make a home out of a place no one else wanted, then I think you'll understand what happened next. Stick with me and maybe we can find some answers together. Make sure you subscribe because this is just the beginning of a story about how the most broken places can hide the most valuable secrets. The night I left the Lakewood Center for Boys, the air was so cold, it felt like swallowing glass. Every breath was a sharp, crystalline pain in my lungs. I was 17, just 3 months shy of aging out, of being handed a thin manila envelope with $100 and a list of resources I couldn't use, and being pushed out the door into a world that had never wanted me in the first place. But I couldn't wait. Not one more night. Not after the fight with Mark. Not after Mr. Henderson looked at me with that familiar, tired disappointment, the same look every adult had given me since my mom disappeared. It was a look that said, "You're a lost cause, kid, just like her." So I ran. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't have anything worth packing. The clothes on my back, the worn-out sneakers on my feet, and a hollow ache in my chest that had been my only constant companion for 9 years. I just slipped out the side door during the late-night shift change, a ghost in a place full of them, and dissolved into the frigid dark. The town ended abruptly, giving way to frozen fields that stretched out under a sliver of moon. I followed a 2-lane road that cut through the farmland, my footsteps crunching on the icy shoulder. Cars were rare, their headlights appearing miles away, giving me plenty of time to dive into the ditch and press myself flat against the frozen earth, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't have a destination. My only plan was to put distance between me and that place, to run until the memory of its sterile hallways and the smell of disinfectant faded from my mind. After what felt like hours, my legs burning and my face numb with cold, I saw it. Set back from the road, almost a quarter-mile down a dirt lane that was more mud than gravel, stood the skeletal silhouette of a barn. Its roof sagged in the middle like a broken back, and the siding was peeling away in long, gray strips. It was derelict, forgotten. It was perfect. Pushing through the overgrown weeds, my sneakers soaking through with melted frost, I made my way to the massive sliding doors. One was jammed shut, but the other hung precariously on its track, leaving a gap just wide enough for a skinny 17-year-old to squeeze through. I slipped inside, and the wind died instantly. The air in the barn was still and heavy, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 seasons, the sweet decay of ancient hay, the sharp tang of rusted metal, the dry, chalky scent of dust that had settled on every surface for decades. Light didn't pour in. It seeped through cracks in the siding like liquid gold, painting stripes across the dirt floor and illuminating swirling motes of dust. It was quiet. Not the oppressive, listening quiet of the group home, but a deep, ancient silence. A silence that felt safe. I found a pile of old, dry hay in a corner stall, burrowed into it like an animal seeking a den, and pulled my thin jacket tight. The exhaustion I'd been running from finally caught up, and I fell into a dreamless, frozen sleep, the first moment of peace I'd felt in years. I spent the next 2 days in that barn, my world shrinking to its dusty, shadowed confines. I'd sneak out at night to a nearby farm stand, stealing a few apples or a couple of hard, pale carrots. It was a miserable existence, but it was mine. I wasn't a case file. I wasn't a problem to be managed. I was just a boy in a barn surviving. On the 3rd day, the cold finally broke. A weak winter sun pushed through the clouds, and the temperature rose just enough to make the world feel less hostile. I was exploring the main floor, kicking at clumps of dirt and debris, when my foot hit something solid, It wasn't a rock, it was a floorboard, but it gave way with a dull thud, different from the others. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't had much use for, sparked inside me. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the cold dirt, and worked my fingers into the gap. The wood was old, but strong. I pulled, grunting with effort, and the board lifted. It wasn't nailed down. It was cut, designed to be removed. Beneath it was a dark, square hole, just big enough to fit a small box. My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. Reaching into the darkness, my fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was an old Army surplus ammunition can, painted black, with a heavy latch on the front. It was locked, not with a padlock, but with a built-in combination lock, rusted and stiff. I sat back on my heels, the cold box resting on my lap, and stared at it. What was this? A farmer's stash? Some kid's secret clubhouse treasure? The sheer improbability of it, finding a secret in a place I'd chosen for its emptiness, felt like a message. Like the barn wasn't just a random shelter, it was something else. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to open it. I tried guessing combinations, birthdays, historical dates, simple patterns. Nothing. Frustrated, I took a heavy piece of rusted pipe I'd found and began hammering at the lock. The noise was deafening in the silence of the barn, each clang echoing like a gunshot. I was terrified someone would hear, but the desperation to know what was inside was stronger. Finally, with a screech of tortured metal, the latch broke. I pried the lid open. The air that escaped smelled of old paper and something else, something vaguely familiar, like a perfume my mom used to wear a lifetime ago. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, were three things: a thick, sealed envelope made of heavy, cream-colored paper, a single ornate brass key, and a small stack of photographs tied with a faded ribbon. My name was written on the envelope in elegant, sloping handwriting. Leo. It was my mother's handwriting. I would know it anywhere. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a farmer's stash. This was for me. How? Why here? My mind reeled, trying to connect the dots between my mother, who I'd been told had abandoned me and died years ago, and this hidden box in a derelict barn miles from anywhere I'd ever lived. Trembling, I picked up the photographs. The top one was of her, smiling, her dark hair blowing in the wind. She was standing in front of this very barn, but it wasn't derelict. It was well kept, painted a deep, cheerful red. Behind her, a man with kind eyes had his arm around her. I didn't recognize him. The next photo was of her holding a baby, me. The ache in my chest intensified, becoming a physical pain. I had seen pictures of her before, but none like this. She looked so happy, so full of life, not the broken, tragic figure the social workers had painted for me. I put the photos aside, my hands shaking too much to look at the rest. I picked up the envelope. My name. Leo. It felt like a ghost was whispering in my ear. With a deep, shuddering breath, I broke the seal. The paper inside was thick and smelled faintly of lavender. Her words, written in that same flowing script, filled the page. It wasn't a long letter, just a single sheet, but every word landed like a physical blow. My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, it means two things. It means you have found your way back to the one place that was ever truly ours. And it means I am gone. I am so sorry. I need you to know that those are not just words. They are the truth that has lived in my heart every single day since I had to leave you. I know what they told you, that I was unstable, that I couldn't care for you, that I ran away. Some of that is a version of the truth, but it's not the whole story. The whole story is more complicated and much more dangerous. This barn, this land, it was meant to be your inheritance, your home, a place where you could be safe, where no one could ever take you away. But forces bigger than us took that away too. I couldn't fight them and protect you at the same time. I had to make a choice, the worst choice a mother can ever make. I chose to save you, even if it meant losing you. This is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. The key in this box opens another secret, a place I built to keep the truth safe. You are standing on the ground floor, but the heart of this place is above you. Look for the north wall of the hayloft. Look for the stall where the light is different. There is a loose stone in the foundation, just behind the old feeding trough. What you find there will explain everything. It will give you a choice. You can take what is there and disappear, live a life of safety and anonymity, or you can finish what I started. Whatever you choose, know this: I never stopped loving you, not for a single second. Every star in the night sky is a wish I made for your happiness. Be brave, my son. Your life is your own now, forever, Mom. I read the letter 3 times, my vision blurring with tears I didn't know I still had. Grief was a familiar weight, but this was different. This was grief mixed with a shocking, disorienting hope. She hadn't abandoned me. She had hidden me. She had been protecting me. The narrative of my life, the one that had been fed to me by a system that saw me as damaged goods, fractured and then shattered completely. The hollow ache in my chest was suddenly filled with a burning fire of questions. What forces, what truth, what was in the hayloft? The letter felt impossibly heavy in my hand, a relic from a life I never got to live. I folded it carefully, reverently, and tucked it into my jacket pocket, the paper crinkling against my chest like a shield. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the barn floor. The world outside the barn, the group home, the police who might be looking for me, the biting cold, it all faded away. My world was now this building, this mystery. I looked up towards the hayloft, a dark, gaping space high above, the heart of this place. My mother's words echoed in my head. Be brave, my son. I didn't feel brave. I felt small and terrified, a boy standing at the edge of a chasm. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone in the dark. My mother's ghost was with me, guiding my hand. I clutched the brass key, its metal cool and solid against my palm, and started climbing the rickety ladder to the hayloft, towards a truth that had been waiting for me for 9 years. The ladder to the hayloft was a series of weathered wooden rungs, nailed directly into the wall. Several were loose, and the whole structure groaned under my weight, each creak and pop amplifying the frantic beating of my heart. I moved slowly, testing each rung before putting my full weight on it, the brass key clenched tightly in my fist. The air grew warmer and thicker as I ascended, the smell of old hay and dry rot more pronounced. Finally, my head cleared the edge of the loft floor. It was a vast, open space, much larger than it looked from below. The roof peaked high above, supported by massive, hand-hewn beams that crisscrossed in the gloom. The entire floor was covered in a thick blanket of loose, dusty straw, and the only light came from a single, grimy window set high in the north-facing wall. It was through this window that the last of the evening sun was streaming, a solitary golden beam that cut through the darkness and illuminated a specific section of the far wall, the stall where the light is different. My mother's words. I pulled myself up onto the loft floor, my sneakers sinking into the straw. The silence up here was even more profound, broken only by the soft whisper of wind finding its way through the chinks in the siding. I waded through the sea of straw, my eyes fixed on the illuminated wall. It was one of the old horse stalls, its wooden partitions still intact. Just as the letter had described, there was an old stone feeding trough built into the corner. I knelt beside it, the rough-cut stone cold against my hands. My gaze traced the foundation wall behind it. It was a patchwork of field stones fitted together with crumbling mortar. I ran my fingers over the stones, searching for anything unusual. At first, they all felt the same. cold, rough, and solid. Doubt began to creep in. Was I crazy? Was this some elaborate, cruel joke? Was I just a desperate kid seeing patterns where there were none? I thought about the group home, about the dead-end life waiting for me. I thought about my mother's handwriting, the smell of her perfume. No, this was real. I had to believe it was real. I pushed the doubt away and focused, my fingers probing every crack, every seam, and then I found it. One of the stones, down low near the floor, shifted ever so slightly under my touch. It was a tiny movement, barely a millimeter, but it was there. My breath hitched. I pressed harder, trying to find a grip. My fingers were raw and cold, but I ignored the pain. I wedged my fingertips into the crack above the stone and pulled. Nothing. It was too heavy. I looked around frantically, my eyes scanning the dimly lit loft. My gaze landed on a long, rusted crowbar, leaning against one of the support beams. I scrambled over to it, grabbed it, and rushed back to the wall. I jammed the flattened end of the crowbar into the crack and leaned on it with all my weight. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a low, grinding groan of stone against stone, the block began to move. It pivoted inward, revealing a dark, cavernous space behind it. A wave of musty, stagnant air washed over me. I dropped the crowbar and peered into the darkness. It was a hidden compartment, about 4 feet high and just as deep, carved out of the thick foundation, and it wasn't empty. Lining the back of the small, hidden chamber were 4 large military-style duffel bags. They were made of a heavy, dark green canvas with sturdy zippers and thick straps. They looked completely out of place in the rustic, decaying barn. Beside them sat a small, weatherproof document case, the kind lawyers or architects use. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. This was it. This was what my mother had hidden. I reached in and grabbed the strap of the nearest duffel bag, pulling it out into the waning light of the hayloft. It was incredibly heavy, far heavier than a bag of clothes should be. My fingers fumbled with the cold metal zipper. It was stiff and I had to yank it hard, the sound tearing through the quiet. The bag fell open. I stared, unable to process what I was seeing. It was full of money. Bundles of cash, neatly wrapped in paper bands. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills. I reached in, my hand trembling, and pulled out a brick of them. The paper band was stamped with the seal of a bank I'd never heard of. The bills were crisp, new. They felt unreal, like play money from a board game. I dropped the bundle back into the bag and scrambled to open the next one. It was the same, and the next, and the next. All 4 bags were filled to the brim with cash. I sat back on my heels, surrounded by a fortune I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Millions. It had to be millions of dollars. My first thought was a wild, giddy rush of pure adrenaline. I was rich. I was free. I could go anywhere, do anything. No more group homes, no more stolen apples, no more feeling like the world's garbage. I could buy a car, an apartment, a new life. The thought was so powerful, so intoxicating, it almost made me dizzy. I laughed, a short, sharp, incredulous bark of a sound that was swallowed by the cavernous space. But then, as the initial shock wore off, a different feeling began to settle in. A cold, heavy dread. Where did this money come from? My mother wasn't a bank robber. She wasn't a criminal. The social workers had painted her as mentally ill and irresponsible, not some kind of master thief. None of it made sense. My eyes fell on the document case. It was the only thing left in the compartment. Slowly, as if in a dream, I reached in and pulled it out. It was latched but not locked. I unclipped the 2 metal fasteners and lifted the lid. Inside, there were no more photographs, no more bundles of cash. There was just a thick stack of papers held together by a binder clip. And on top, another letter. This one was much longer than the first. I picked it up. My mother's handwriting again, but this time it was tighter, more urgent. The date at the top was only a few days before she had left me at the foster agency. This was her final message. Leo, if you are reading this, then you have found the money. I imagine you are feeling 1,000 different things right now. Shock, joy, fear. Please, before you do anything, read this. Read all of it. You need to understand where this money came from, because it is not a gift. It is a weapon, and it is a burden. I was an environmental engineer. I worked for a company called Viridian Development. They were powerful, connected, and they specialized in buying up rural land and rezoning it for industrial use. On the surface, it was all legal, but I discovered what they were really doing. They were targeting poor agricultural communities, places with little political power, and building toxic waste disposal sites. They were falsifying environmental impact reports, bribing local officials, and burying chemicals that would poison the groundwater for generations. This land, this farm, was next on their list. The family who owned it, the Millers, were old friends. They refused to sell. Viridian started a campaign of harassment to force them out. That's when I started digging deeper. What I found was a conspiracy that went all the way to the top. A pattern of illness, of cancer clusters. In every community where Viridian had built a facility, they were knowingly poisoning people, destroying ecosystems, all for profit. I copied everything. Internal memos, falsified soil reports, secret financial records showing the payoffs. I had enough evidence to destroy them. I went to my boss, thinking he was a good man. I was wrong. He was part of it. The next day, my brakes failed on the highway. It wasn't an accident. I realized then that they wouldn't just fire me. They would silence me. Permanently. That's where the money comes in. One of the executives at Viridian, a man with a conscience, wanted out. He was terrified. He funneled me millions of dollars from an offshore account, the company's slush fund for bribes. It was meant to be my escape fund, enough for me and you to disappear and live new lives somewhere they could never find us. But it was also my leverage. I let them know I had it. I let them know that if anything happened to me, the money and the documents would be released to the press and the federal authorities. It created a stalemate. They couldn't touch me without bringing everything crashing down. But I couldn't go to the authorities either, because they had people everywhere. And they knew about you, Leo. They made it very clear that if I went public, they would find a way to hurt you. They would make it look like an accident, a tragic mishap at school, a foster home fire. They would take away the only thing in the world that mattered to me. So I made the choice. I couldn't have both. I couldn't have justice and have you. I took the money and I ran. I staged my own disappearance, creating a story of a mentally unstable mother who cracked under pressure. I paid people to create a false trail, to make it look like I'd died in another state, and I left you, my beautiful boy, in the one place I knew they wouldn't look for you, the system. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It broke my soul, but I knew you would be physically safe there, anonymous, a needle in a haystack of other lost children. This barn was our secret, my hiding place for the evidence and the money. I hoped one day I could come back, that things would change, that I could find a way to expose them and reclaim you. But my time ran out. They never stopped looking for me, and I think they finally found me. I don't have much time left. Now, the choice is yours. The documents in this case are the proof. The money is the means. You can take the money and run, disappear, live a quiet life. No one would blame you. God knows you deserve peace. Or you can finish what I started. You can use this evidence to expose Viridian, to get justice for the people they poisoned, to save this land. But I must warn you, if you choose that path, you will be painting a target on your back. They will come for you, just as they came for me. The papers in the binder clip are everything. The name at the very end is Arthur Albright. He was my lawyer, the only person I trusted. If you choose to fight, find him. He will know what to do. Whatever you decide, Leo, please know that leaving you was not an abandonment. It was an act of love, the only kind I had left to give. You were my everything, my whole heart. Mom. The letter fell from my fingers. The air in the hayloft was thick and suffocating. The millions of dollars surrounding me no longer looked like a treasure. It looked like blood money. It felt dirty, cursed. The joy I had felt just moments before was gone, replaced by a grief so profound it felt like I was drowning. My mother hadn't been sick. She had been a warrior. She had sacrificed her life, her reputation, her own son, to protect him and to fight an evil I could barely comprehend. And she had died for it. The truth was so much bigger, so much more terrible and beautiful than the simple, sad story I had been told. I cried, not the silent, choked-off tears of the group home, but racking, agonizing sobs that tore through my body. I cried for the mother I never knew. I cried for the life we could have had. I cried for the 9 years I had spent believing I was unlovable, disposable. I cried because her last act was to hand me this impossible choice. Be safe and rich, or be brave and hunted. The sun had completely set now, and the hayloft was plunged into a deep, velvety darkness. I sat there in the dark, surrounded by a fortune in cash and a truth that was heavier than any gold, and I felt more alone than ever before. The weight of her legacy, of her sacrifice, settled onto my 17-year-old shoulders. What do you do when your inheritance isn't a gift, but a war? Listen, if you've made it this far, you're not just watching a story. You're sitting here in this dark barn with me. And I have to ask you, have you ever been handed a burden you didn't ask for? A secret or a responsibility that changed the entire course of your life? It's a heavy thing to carry someone else's fight. Part of you wants to just drop it, to walk away and save yourself. And who could blame you but another part? Another part knows that maybe, just maybe, you were given this weight because you're strong enough to carry it. I'm going to tell you what I did next. But first, if this is hitting you, if you've ever had to make an impossible choice, let me know in the comments. You're not alone in this. This community is built on people who understand that strength isn't about never falling. It's about what you do when you get back up. Now, let's get back to the darkness and the choice I had to make. I spent the entire night in that hayloft, motionless, the cold seeping back into my bones. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a chaotic storm of my mother's words, the image of all that cash and the terrifying shadow of a faceless corporation, Viridian Development. The name sounded so benign, so clean. It was the kind of name you saw on billboards for luxury condos, not on the tombstone of a poisoned town. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's smiling face from the photograph, then imagined her fear in those final days, knowing they were closing in. Her love for me was a living thing in that barn, a tangible presence. It was in the careful way she had packed the box, the scent of lavender on her letters, the desperate hope that I would one day find my way back here. How could I take her sacrifice, the very thing she gave up her life for, and use it to buy myself a comfortable, meaningless existence? How could I run away with the money when she had run toward the fight? By the time the first gray light of dawn filtered through the grimy window, the storm in my mind had quieted. There was no real choice, not for me, not for the son of Alara Vance. My mother didn't raise a coward. She just didn't get to raise me for long enough. I knew what I had to do. I had to find Arthur Albright. The first step was securing the inheritance. I couldn't leave millions of dollars and damning evidence sitting in a drafty hayloft. I carefully repacked the document case and zipped up the 4 duffel bags. Moving them was a struggle. They were brutally heavy, and I had to drag them one by one to the ladder and lower them down with a length of old rope I found. The entire process took hours, my muscles screaming in protest. I hid 3 of the bags in different, less obvious spots around the barn. One buried deep under the hay pile where I had first slept, another tucked into an empty water cistern, and a third wedged behind a stack of rotting timbers. I would take 1 bag of cash with me. I needed resources. The final and most important piece was the document case. I couldn't risk losing it. I found an old, greasy tarp and wrapped the case tightly, then buried it under the very floorboard where my search had begun, packing the dirt down hard on top of it. It was the first place I had looked. No one would ever think to look there again. With the barn secured, I faced my next problem, Arthur Albright. The letter said he was a lawyer, but it didn't say where. I had no phone, no internet. I was a ghost. I took a few $1,000s from the bag I was keeping, stuffing the bills into my pockets. It felt strange, criminal almost, to have so much money. The bills were stiff and smelled of ink and canvas. I walked the miles back towards the edge of town, my mind racing. I couldn't just walk into a library. A runaway kid with pockets full of cash would raise alarms. I needed to be invisible. I found a small, dingy motel on the outskirts of town, the kind that charged by the hour and didn't ask for ID if you paid in cash. The man at the desk, a sallow-faced guy with a cigarette dangling from his lips, barely glanced at me as I peeled $200 bills from my wad and slid them across the counter. He slid a key back. Room 107. The room was small and smelled of stale smoke and bleach, but it had a door that locked, a lumpy bed, and most importantly, a phone book. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the yellowed pages to the A section under Attorneys. My eyes scanned the list. Abrams, Adams, Albright. There it was. Albright, Arthur, an address on Main Street in the next town over, about 20 miles away. There was a phone number. I stared at it, my finger hovering over the numbers on the phone's keypad. What do I say? "Hi, my name is Leo. My dead mother told me in a letter to call you about a corporate conspiracy and several $1,000,000 in cash I found in a barn?" It sounded insane. He would hang up on me. He would think it was a prank. But my mother had trusted him. That had to be enough. I took a deep breath, picked up the receiver, and dialed the number. It rang 3 times, each one a lifetime. Then a calm, professional voice answered. Albright Law. "Hello," I stammered, my voice cracking. I need to speak with Mr. Albright." "May I ask who is calling?" the receptionist asked politely. I froze. I couldn't give my real name. Not yet. "My name is Miller," I said, grabbing the name of the family from my mother's letter. "It's about Alara Vance." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a long, heavy silence. I thought she had hung up. Then the receptionist's voice came back. Her tone changed. It was more guarded now. "One moment, please." I heard a click, then more silence. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Finally, a new voice came on the line. It was an older man's voice, deep and gravelly, but with a palpable sense of weariness. "This is Arthur Albright. You mentioned Alara Vance." "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She was my mother." Another silence, even heavier than the first. I could hear the man breathing on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It sounded like sorrow. "Where are you, son?" he asked. "I'm in a motel in Northwood." "Don't move," he said, his voice now firm, commanding. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't leave that room. I'm on my way." The line went dead. I hung up the phone, my entire body trembling. It was real. He knew. He was coming. The weight on my shoulders didn't disappear, but for the first time, I felt like I might not have to carry it all by myself. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the duffel bag of money at my feet, and waited. An hour later, a knock came at the door. It wasn't a loud, aggressive knock, but a soft, deliberate rap. I looked through the peephole. An older man stood in the dim hallway, his shoulders slightly stooped. He had a full head of white hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and he was wearing a simple, well-worn tweed coat. He looked more like a college professor than a high-powered lawyer. He looked tired. He looked like he carried his own heavy burdens. I opened the door. He looked me up and down, his eyes a surprisingly sharp blue, taking in my disheveled appearance, the fear that I was sure was written all over my face. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, and in his gaze I saw a flicker of recognition, a deep-seated sadness. "You have her eyes," he said softly. His voice was exactly as it had been on the phone, gravelly and kind. He wasn't looking at me like I was a problem or a runaway or a criminal. He was looking at me like he knew me, like he had been waiting for me. "You're Leo," he stated, not as a question. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. "May I come in?" he asked gently. I stepped back and let him into the small, grim room. He surveyed the space with a practiced, neutral expression, his eyes lingering for a moment on the duffel bag at my feet. He didn't seem surprised. He sat down in the room's single rickety chair, gesturing for me to sit on the bed. "Your mother," he began, his voice low. I haven't heard that name spoken out loud in 9 years. I feared the worst. "She's gone," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "I think they found her, but she left me something. She left me everything." I explained it all. The run from the group home, finding the barn, the box, the key, the letters. I told him about the hidden compartment, the document case, the bags of money. I talked for almost half an hour, my voice gaining strength as I went, the story pouring out of me like a dam had broken. Arthur Albright listened without interrupting. He just sat there, his hands clasped on his lap, his gaze fixed on me, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, the room was silent again. He let the silence hang in the air for a long time, as if giving my story the space and respect it deserved. "She was the bravest person I ever knew," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "And the most stubborn. When she came to me with those documents, I told her to go to the FBI. She refused. She said Viridian had their hooks in too deep, that the evidence would be buried and she would be discredited or killed. She was convinced the only leverage she had was to hold it over their heads, to create a kind of mutually assured destruction." He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "This money, it was her insurance policy, but it was also her cage. As long as she had it, they couldn't move against her openly, but she could never be free, and she could never come back for you." "She said to give the documents to you," I said, my voice pleading. "She said you would know what to do." Albright nodded slowly. "I do, but Leo, you need to understand what you're asking. Your mother was right. Viridian is not just some company. It's a machine. It has lawyers, investigators, political connections. The moment we make a move, that machine will turn its full attention on you. They will try to discredit you. They'll say you're a delinquent runaway, a thief who stumbled upon this money. They will try to paint your mother as a criminal, an extortionist. They will tear your life apart to protect themselves." He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto mine. "Your mother gave you a choice, to walk away. That choice is still yours. I can help you with that too. I can help you create a new identity, invest this money legally. You could go to college, build a life. No one would ever know. It would be an honorable way to respect her sacrifice, to live the life she couldn't give you." His words were a lifeline. He was offering me an escape, a clean, respectable way out. Everything a scared, lonely kid could ever want. For a fleeting moment, I was tempted. The thought of a normal life, a safe life, was a powerful lure. But then I saw my mother's face again. I heard her voice from the letter. Finish what I started. I thought of the families, the people in towns I'd never seen, who were sick, who had lost loved ones because of Viridian's greed. My mother had died trying to save them. If I walked away now, her death would be for nothing. No, I said, the word coming out clearer and stronger than I expected. No, I'm not running. She didn't run. I want to fight. A slow smile spread across Arthur Albright's face. It was a sad smile, but it was also proud. I was hoping you'd say that, he said. Your mother would be so proud of you, Leo. So incredibly proud. He stood up, his posture seeming straighter, more resolute. All right then, here's what we do. First, you are no longer a runaway. You are my client. As of this moment, you are under my legal protection. We'll deal with the group home. I'll inform them you are safe and with legal counsel. Second, we need the evidence. All of it. We'll go back to the barn together. Tonight. He paused, looking at the duffel bag. And the money. That's our war chest. We're not going to just hand it over. We're going to use it. Your mother's leverage is now our leverage. For the first time, I felt a flicker of real power, not the intoxicating fantasy of being rich, but the solid grounding power of purpose. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was mixed with something else, determination. I wasn't just a boy in a barn anymore. I was the keeper of a secret, the executor of my mother's will and a client of Arthur Albright. The fight had begun. That night, under the cover of complete darkness, we drove back to the barn in Albright's old, unassuming sedan. He didn't ask me for directions, he knew the way. As we turned down the muddy lane, he spoke for the first time in miles. Alara loved this place, he said, his voice soft. She and your father bought it before you were born. They were going to fix it up, start a small organic farm. It was their dream. My father, the man in the photograph, I had never even known his name. What happened to him? I asked, my voice small. Albright was silent for a moment. He was a journalist, an investigative reporter. He was the one who first got a tip about Viridian's activities. He started digging. About a year after you were born, he died in a car accident. A single-vehicle crash on a clear night. The police ruled it an accident. Alara never believed it. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying finality. This wasn't just my mother's fight, it was my father's too. I was the heir to a war that had been raging since before I could walk. We parked the car out of sight and made our way into the barn. It felt different now, returning with Albright. It was no longer just my refuge. It was a battleground, a memorial. I showed him where I had hidden everything. With a quiet, methodical efficiency, he helped me retrieve the document case and the other 3 bags of money. We loaded them into the trunk of his car, the vehicle sinking slightly under the immense weight. As we were about to leave, I paused at the entrance, looking back into the vast, dark space. What happens to the barn? I asked. Viridian tried to seize it for back taxes after your mother disappeared, Albright explained. I managed to tie it up in litigation for years using a shell corporation I created. Technically, it's still in legal limbo. They can't touch it, but we don't truly own it either. It's just waiting. He placed a hand on my shoulder. One thing at a time, Leo. First, the battle. Then we reclaim the dream. The next few weeks were a blur of legal strategy and covert preparations. Albright moved me from the motel to a small, secure apartment he kept for sensitive clients. We spent days going through the documents my mother had collected. It was a mountain of evidence, internal emails with coded language, shipping manifests for toxic chemicals to sites that weren't zoned for them, geological surveys that had been deliberately altered, and a ledger of payments to shell companies that were traced back to politicians and regulators. It was a detailed blueprint of Viridian's entire criminal enterprise. Albright scanned every single page, creating multiple digital backups stored on encrypted drives. "They'll claim these are forgeries," he said, tapping a stack of papers. "Our first job is to get them authenticated by an independent expert, a forensic accountant. I know a man. He's expensive, but he's the best, and he's incorruptible." This was where the money came in. We used the cash, my mother's leverage, to hire the best people, operating completely off the books. We hired the forensic accountant. We hired a private investigator to track the current movements of the Viridian executives named in the documents. We hired a public relations expert who specialized in crisis management to help us shape the narrative when the story finally broke. We were building an army in the shadows, funded by Viridian's own dirty money. It was a strange, surreal existence. By day, I was a key player in a high-stakes corporate espionage takedown. By night, I was just a teenager, haunted by memories, trying to piece together a childhood I'd never had from the fragments my mother had left behind. Albright became more than just my lawyer. He became a mentor, a guardian. He told me stories about my parents, about their idealism, their love for each other, their dreams for the farm. He filled in the empty spaces of my past. One evening, as we were preparing to make our first move, Albright received a call. I watched as the color drained from his face. He listened for a long moment, then hung up without a word. "What is it?" I asked, my stomach twisting into a knot. "That was my investigator," he said, his voice grim. "Viridian knows. They don't know what we have or who you are, but they know someone is digging into their past. They've put a tail on me, and they've filed a motion to expedite the seizure of the barn, citing it as an abandoned and hazardous property." The machine was turning its eye on us. The abstract threat had become concrete and immediate. "They're trying to flush us out," Albright continued, "and they sent a message." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a message from a courier. It wasn't addressed to him or to me. It was an offer, a settlement. Viridian Development was offering $10 million for the return of any and all proprietary documents, with a non-disclosure agreement so ironclad it would mean prison time if we ever spoke a word of it. And at the bottom, a handwritten note. "Don't make the same mistake Alara Vance did. Some things are better left buried." It wasn't an offer, it was a threat. They were offering me more money than was in the duffel bags, a clean way out. All I had to do was betray my mother, betray her memory, and let them get away with it all. They thought they could buy my silence. They had miscalculated. They didn't understand that my inheritance wasn't the money. It was the fight. "What do we do?" I asked Albright, my voice steady. He looked at me, a flicker of that proud smile returning to his face. "Now," he said, "we show them who you are." Our plan was bold and it was dangerous. We couldn't just hand the evidence to the authorities, not with Viridian's influence. We had to detonate it in the court of public opinion, to make the story so big that it couldn't be buried. The PR expert Albright had hired, a sharp, fast-talking woman named Lena, devised the strategy. We would leak the documents simultaneously to a major national newspaper and to a federal environmental protection agency in a different state, one where Viridian had no political capital. But the centerpiece of the plan was me. I wouldn't be an anonymous source. I would be the face of the story, the son of the woman they had destroyed, coming back to finish her work. It was a massive risk. It meant stepping out of the shadows and putting myself directly in the crosshairs. Lena prepped me for days, coaching me, teaching me how to tell my story, how to answer the questions that would be thrown at me. She taught me how to be my mother's son in front of the world. The day we chose for the leak was the same day as Viridian's hearing to seize the barn. While their lawyers were in a local courthouse arguing that the property was an abandoned nuisance, We were in a hotel conference room in a city 3 states away with a single trusted journalist from a national paper. Albright laid out the case, presenting the authenticated documents, the financial records, the whole sordid story. Then it was my turn. I told them everything. I told them about my mother, about the letters, about growing up in the system believing I was abandoned. I told them about finding her truth, hidden in the walls of our forgotten home. I didn't have to act. The story was so deeply a part of me, the grief and the anger so real, that it just poured out. When I was done, the room was silent. The journalist, a veteran reporter who had seen it all, just looked at me, her expression a mixture of shock and profound empathy. "This is bigger than just one company," she said. "This is about the soul of the country." That afternoon, the first wave of the story broke online. The headline was explosive. "Whistleblower's son emerges with proof of decades-long corporate poisoning conspiracy." The article included scanned copies of the most damning documents and excerpts from my mother's letters. It was a bombshell. By evening, it was the lead story on every national news network. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Viridian. Their stock plummeted. The EPA announced a federal investigation. State attorneys general from half a dozen states launched their own inquiries. The executives named in the documents went to ground, their lawyers issuing frantic denials that no one believed. The machine was breaking, but there was one final piece of the puzzle: the barn. While the world was focused on the corporate scandal, Albright had made a move. Using the cash from the duffel bags, the money Viridian itself had provided, he had anonymously bought out the shell corporation that held the barn in legal limbo, and then paid all the back taxes and fines in full. He filed the paperwork that very afternoon. By the time Viridian's lawyers walked out of the courthouse, having successfully won their motion to seize the abandoned property, it was too late. The property was no longer abandoned or in arrears. It was owned, free and clear, by a newly created trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust was me. I owned it. I owned my home. The fight wasn't over. There would be years of legal battles, trials, and depositions. But we had won the war. We had brought the truth into the light. A few weeks later, I went back to the barn. It was the first time I had been there since that night with Albright. It was a cool, clear autumn day. The air was crisp, and the leaves on the trees surrounding the property were a riot of red and gold. The barn looked different. The sagging roof, the peeling paint, it no longer looked like decay. It looked like resilience. It had kept its secrets safe. It had waited for me. I stood at the entrance. The big door slid open and looked inside. The dust motes still danced in the sunbeams. The air still smelled of hay and history, but it wasn't an empty, forgotten place anymore. It was full. It was full of my mother's love, my father's courage, and the future I was just beginning to build. I wasn't a runaway anymore. I wasn't a case file. I was Leo Vance, the son of heroes, and I was home. My story didn't end there. It was really just a new beginning. The legal battles against Viridian raged for years, just as Albright predicted. Some executives went to prison. The company was broken up, forced to pay billions in fines and cleanup costs to the communities it had devastated. It was a victory, but a messy one, written in the dry language of court filings and settlement agreements. The real victory for me was something quieter. With the remainder of the money that was legally mine through the trust, I started the Alara Vance Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing legal aid to environmental whistleblowers and protecting rural communities from corporate predation. I didn't fix the barn myself. Instead, I hired local craftsmen, people from the very community my parents had wanted to join, to bring it back to life. They restored the sagging roof, replaced the rotten siding, and polished the old wood until it shone. We didn't turn it into a mansion. We turned it into the Foundation's headquarters, my home. I went to college studying environmental law, just like my mother. I wasn't a ghost in the system anymore. I was a young man with a purpose, fueled by a legacy I was determined to honor. The barn is no longer a shelter from the world. It's a beacon, a place where people who are fighting their own battles against their own giants can come for help. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I climb up to the hayloft. The hidden compartment is still there, the stone block now sealed shut. I stand by the window looking out over the fields, and I think about the choice my mother gave me. Run or fight, disappear or build. It's a choice we all face in some way, isn't it? When we're confronted with a truth that's too heavy, a past that's too painful, it's so tempting to just take the easy path, to find a quiet corner of the world and hide. But my mother taught me, through her letters and her sacrifice, that the only way to truly live is to face the darkness, to fight for the light, not just for yourself, but for those who can't. My inheritance wasn't the millions of dollars in those bags. It was the story. It was the strength to turn a place of hiding into a place of healing. It was the understanding that home isn't just a place you live, it's a place you fight for, and that's a truth worth more than any fortune. So I want to leave you with this. What is the inheritance you carry? It might not be a secret in a barn, but we all have one. A story, a value, a lesson from someone we loved. Don't let it be a burden. Let it be your weapon. Let it be your guide. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, if you believe that stories like this need to be told, then join this community. Subscribe, share, and in the comments, tell me about a legacy you're proud to carry. Because every story shared is another light against the dark. And together, we can build something that lasts.